Okay, hello English Lit students. This is a mini lecture on one of the key contexts for the Moonstone, which is one of your prose texts for paper 2, Crime and Detection. And this is about the context of the British and India, or the British in India, and how that can have an influence on the understanding of the novel. Okay, so we're going back a bit just to understand how come the British were in India at all to start with. And what was established was a company called the East India Company. And that was granted a trading monopoly by the British Crown. So one of the ways the monarchs made money was by giving monopolies to companies and saying only you can get the trade from a certain place or the trade in a certain commodity. Called the East Indies to distinguish them from the West Indies, and it was a very important source of trade and therefore wealth, particularly spices, lots of things that you couldn't get in Europe. The East India Company focused particularly on importing cotton and silk from India, and they established at the very beginning just what were called trading outposts on the coast, quite to the east of India, in cities called at the time Madras, Bombay and Bengal. And once they established their trading posts, they also, the East India Company, recruited armed forces, okay, to protect their trading posts, to protect their wealth and their property. These armed forces were recruited from the Indian population, and the East India Company grew increasingly powerful and became actually political rulers and started making treaties with local rulers. So India at the time was many different states. It's a massive place. It's a subcontinent rather than what you might think of as a country. They were like individual countries within different languages, different peoples, different customs, different religions. And so the East India Company, its power and influence and control in India continued to grow throughout this period of the dates we've got here from between 1757 and 1856. Its influence and its army continued to grow. So one of the key dates why we've got 1757 is that's the first time the company used its forces to fight against Indian rulers who didn't want them to trade, or to protect one Indian ruler who did support the East India Company against another one who didn't. So they started getting involved in these sort of local politics between different Indian states. The image you can see there is of the East India Company's troops. Okay, so two things you will notice. One is that they are all local Indians. And the other is that they're wearing this red uniform. It looks like a British Army uniform, but it's not. It's the East India Company's uniform. Now, the big change in the East India Company's role in India happened when they started taxing. So they're starting to act like a state themselves, not a company. But once they start imposing tax on people, they're pretty much acting as the rulers. So they started taxing people who lived in their territories and accruing legal powers over them. So they started being the rulers. So it's a company that starts ruling a state and some people. And this led to resentment in local populations. And interestingly, one of the biggest foolish mistakes they made was to start allowing Christian missionaries to come into Indian states. And they started trying to morally reform Indian customs and practices. And that's led to really big resentment against the East India Company, specifically British people generally. Now, one of the most explicit references in the novel to a real historical event is the description of the storming of Seringapatam, which happened in 1799. Once again, not the British Army, the East India Company forces. So as their influence spread, they became involved in besieging the capital of a chap called Tipu Sultan. He was a fiercely independent ruler called the Tiger of Mysore. Mysore is a city and an area in India. The image you can see there is called Tipu's Tiger. It's an amazing device. It's a mechanical toy, and it represents a tiger mauling a British soldier. you can see the soldier is wearing the red coat of the East India Company, and the tiger would move and attack the British soldier. And the tiger is a symbol in India, of India itself, but particularly it was associated with this ruler, Tipu. Mysore stoutly defended the city. Nearly 10,000 inhabitants were killed, including the Sultan Tipu himself. And as was widespread practice in 19th century warfare, officers were awarded prizes. They were literally given booty and money for winning, between £800 and £20,000. These are enormous sums. And it gives you an idea of how much wealth was being transferred from India to Britain during this period. Wide-scale looting also occurred, which we see depicted in the prologue of the Moonstone. And one of the pieces of booty was this mechanical beast. And it's today, I think it's in the British Museum, might be in the Museum of London. Okay, so there is a real diamond called the Koh-i-Noor diamond. It literally translates as mountain of light. And it had been around for a long time in India. People think it was probably first mined in Afghanistan. By 1813, the ruler of the Punjab, who was himself Sikh, he owned this diamond, known as the Mountain of Light. And he was intending to give it to Hindu priests. In the Moonstone, these are Brahmins. Okay, the name for the priest class in Hinduism are Brahmins. And in 1839, he was intending to give the diamond to the Hindu priests. And the British press got involved. And this idea that the British press claimed that we had a right to this diamond owned by some Indian ruler in India is amazing. And this is what they wrote. The richest, the most costly gem in the known world has been committed to the trust of a profane, idolatrous and mercenary priesthood. So some very racist / prejudiced attitudes there towards a different race of people and a different religion. Profane is the opposite of sacred, so it means they're blasphemous. Idolatrous, this claim that they worship statues and idols, which is, not something that Christians should do. And also calling them mercenary, so saying, oh, well, they're scummy, they want money and wealth. When they want the money and wealth, they're literally saying we've got more right to this diamond than those guys. And he didn't give it to them, but he was intending to. But in 1849, Ranjit Singh died, and the throne should have gone to his 10-year-old son, and his mother was in charge like a regent. And the East India Company knew this meant that they were weak, that this was a prime time to attack, and so they did. And they basically imprisoned the poor boy, and they forced him to sign over his rule to them. And so they started ruling Punjab instead, and they took the jewel as well. And they gave the diamond to Queen Victoria, and she wore it as a brooch, which may remind you of Rachel Verinder and what she did with the diamond. It was later added to the crown jewels, and it was worn by the wives of British kings from 1901. And the last to wear it was the Queen Mother. Okay, because our present Queen is not Queen because she's married to a king, she's Queen in her own right. Before the Moonstone had been written, one of the most shocking and awful events in the history of Britain and India happened. In Britain, it was called the Indian Mutiny. In India today, they prefer to call it a rebellion or a revolution. Okay, but the facts are that the increasing resentment of the power and influence of the East India Company finally boiled over. And as I mentioned, partly because of allowing in Christian missionaries and interfering with certain Indian customs. 80% of the troops in the East India Company's army were of Indian origin. And therefore, it was a mutiny in that respect. It started with the troops refusing to take orders from their officers. And how it actually started were patently false rumours that new ammunition was smeared with animal fat. And why we kind of know this was sort of a very clever rumour to get people to mutiny, is that Hindu soldiers were told it was smeared in beef fat because the cow is a sacred animal to the Hindus, and Muslim soldiers were told they were smeared with pig fat, and pig is a disgusting animal in Muslim religion, and you shouldn't eat it and you shouldn't touch it, it will defile you. So clearly it wasn't both, it had to be one or the other, but they were told different things, and the way they were treated, the way they were ordered to just use this ammunition and not listen to, mutiny occurred, and then rebellions broke out. Many states joined in. There was extreme and bloody violence on both sides, but of course the British press didn't report the extreme and bloody violence by the British troops. They only reported the extreme and bloody violence by the Indian rebellion people. And really that was the death knell for the East India Company in India. After the mutiny, there were a bunch of scandals, impropriety, bribery, corruption. An inquiry was held by the British government into the East India Company's rule in India, and it was very critical, and lots of East India Company people, they didn't lose their wealth, but they lost their status and their reputations. And in 1858, the British government assumed direct control of the company's assets, its forces and its businesses. So what had once been a private company was now the British government's. All that wealth, all those taxes and all those armed forces were now ruled directly from Britain. And in 1877, Queen Victoria was named the Empress of India. There were still independent states and rulers, yes, it still wasn't the entirety of India. India didn't finally gain independence from British rule until 1947. Now the image I've added to this slide, I want to give it some context. This is a British cartoon, and it shows you the sorts of the racist, patronising attitudes towards the Indian state and the Indian people. So this picture of Queen Victoria higher, looking down, and then the embodiment of India is this creature below, crouching and humble and petitioning. You can see all sorts of negative stereotypes at work there, and the British attitude towards India and Indian people. Now this is an interesting term. It's called Orientalism, and it's a word used to describe the illusory idea that people in Britain had of the East. Okay, Victorian Britain became fascinated by aspects of Indian culture. I say Victorian Britain, 19th century Britain, from perhaps even earlier, maybe late in the 1700s. Indian styles started to appear on textiles, crockery, furnishings, even architecture. And this amazing building, I should ask you, where do you think that is? Yeah, that's in England, that's in Brighton. That's Brighton Pavilion, but clearly inspired by a sort of crazy vision of the East and what buildings in the East look like. So Orientalism can be used to describe stereotyped representations of the East as exotic, but also backward, uncivilized and superstitious. So you might want to think about how the three Indian Brahmins are represented in the Moonstone. Particularly after the mutiny, attitudes to Indian people hardened in Britain, and they were increasingly seen as dangerously savage. So this all feeds into the symbolism of the Moonstone itself. If you think about this context, the jewel can be seen to stand for the plunder and exploitation of India by its British rulers. A happy resolution is only possible if the jewel can be returned to its rightful place and purpose. So the three Brahmins can be seen as the tools of nemesis, that is, revenge. They bring justice to the wrongdoers, Colonel Herncastle and Godfrey Ablewhite. And Collins depicts the Brahmins very sympathetically in the text's resolution.